now. People are screaming across town 20, 30 miles an hour. They still want to go places. They still want to cross the water. The ferry companies are pretty smart. They see cars arriving and changing things. They have car ferries built. And car ferries do a really pretty darn good job of keeping up with the demand, at least at first. So people have a little different experience now. They get in their car at home and they drive down to the water's edge and they drive onto the ferry. The boat's not going any faster. It's still doing the 6 to 15 miles an hour. The car's going twice that. And suddenly the bay is seen as a big inconvenience, a nuisance, no longer anybody's best friend. So that's when the voices for bridge building start to get louder. One of the first, we're going to meet several people responsible for getting the bridge built. The first one is a guy named Charles, got my first name mixed up, named Michael O'Shaughnessy. He is a Scottish immigrant, a civil engineer. He is San Francisco's city engineer, which means he's the person responsible for managing all the civic infrastructure in the city. He'd been hired in 1912 directly by the mayor. The mayor was disappointed with what he thought was a slow recovery from San Francisco's destructive 1906, the great earthquake, the big one as we like to call it. Very powerful earthquake. Many buildings came down, but the greatest damage was the 3 days of fire that swept the city following, with lots of broken water mains, so the hydrants didn't work, and lots of broken gas mains, so lots of fires got started. Half the city burns to the ground over a 3-day span, 200,000 people homeless. A big setback for the city. So the mayor wants San Francisco's recovery to speed up. I mean, he's especially upset because there's no new city hall even 6 years later. The city hall had been destroyed. The city government's being run out of a half a dozen hotel rooms on Market Street. Very embarrassing. Worse than that, probably, is Los Angeles is starting to become the more important economic center on the West Coast, and nobody's happy about that. So the mayor hires O'Shaughnessy. He tells him, you get done what you think needs getting done. I won't ask any questions. I will protect you politically. If someone steps forward and says, oh, O'Shaughnessy's ideas are terrible, or they cost too much money or something, I will cover you. I will make sure that nobody gets anywhere with that. And that's how things proceed. O'Shaughnessy gets a lot of work done in a hurry. Now, his background is in things like lighting, streets, water systems, not bridges. He's not a bridge designer. He's not a bridge engineer. But he, on his own, has the sense that connecting to the city to neighboring towns would be a great way to help jumpstart the recovery and the importance of the city. So in the course of his official duties, every time he meets a bridge builder, he asks the same question. Can you build a bridge at the Golden Gate Strait? And if so, what would it cost? And mostly he gets pretty disappointing answers. The big one he hears is, you are insane, that cannot be done. And the second most popular is, yes, I can, for $100 million. Now, the eventual cost of building the bridge was a little over $35 million. So 3 times that, quite a few years before, was certainly not going to get anybody in the door. But O'Shaughnessy doesn't give up. He keeps asking, he keeps asking. So our next character in the bridge story is Joseph Strauss. That's his statue we met by. He is called, the title he was given is the Chief Engineer of the Golden Gate Bridge, which is kind of generous. He was a very important figure in the bridge for sure, but he's not the engineer of the bridge. Very important guy, just very little of the engineering in the bridge was from him. So, Strauss is a very successful bridge builder. By 1915, he had already built 400 bridges, mostly in the U.S., a few other countries, and mostly in the Midwest and the East. He wants to expand his bridge building empire out west. So he comes out here to see if he can drum up some business. This is the type of bridge that Strauss is very well known for, and he holds a lot of patents for. This is called a bascule bridge. It's a drawbridge, tilts up on one side, lets the marine traffic go by. Some of the good things about bascule bridges is that as bridges go, they're relatively inexpensive. They're also really dependable. There are lots of really old bascule bridges that are, more than 100 years old and still on the job. On the other hand, they're not anything like you would call beautiful. You might sense a disconnect between what's in the picture and what's right over there. Which is not to say that Strauss lacked aesthetics. He probably had a surplus, if anything. He grew up in an arts family. His father was a painter. His mother was a musician. Neither of them really household names. The family kind of got by, kind of lower middle class, maybe you might say. But it let Strauss see the world through a very artistic lens. He saw things in very poetic, mystical terms. He was a big fan of metaphor. He goes to the University of Cincinnati. Now, Strauss is significantly shorter than the statue suggests. He's a tiny bit over 5 feet tall. He's very slightly built, about 100 pounds. He decides he's going to make a mark for himself on campus by trying out for the football team. And the next thing we know, he is in a hospital bed recovering from the tryout. A number of the athletes see him at a practice, and they decide that he's small enough to use as a football. So they're throwing him around. He gets hurt. They actually felt really bad. A lot of them came to visit him in the hotel room and apologized. So while he's there, he has a chance to do a lot of thinking. And out the window, there is a bridge in Cincinnati. It's called the Cincinnati-Covington Bridge. It goes over the Ohio River into Kentucky. He's looking at this bridge every day. Now, a bridge to Strauss isn't just something that goes across. He sees it as the promise of what's on the other side and what will tomorrow bring, and all those kinds of very poetic terms. On the spot, he decides he's going to dedicate his education to bridge building. That's how he gets into the business. After school, he works his way up at a succession of bridge building companies, starting as a draftsman and, eventually starting his own very successful bridge company. All right, so that's Strauss. He comes out here in 1915 to expand his territory because San Francisco is hosting a World's Fair. It's called it's called the Panama Pacific International Exhibition, and it's meant to be celebrating the opening of the Panama Canal the year before. It's also meant to be showing the world that San Francisco is back on the map. We've recovered. Please come here and do business with us and spend lots of money. And it's very successful at both of those things. In one corner of the PPIE, there is a standard amusement ride area for people to blow off steam, and one particular ride was the most popular of all, and it's put there by Strauss. This was it. It's called the Aeroscope. It's the boxy bit at the top is a glassed-in compartment that holds about 125 people, lifts them up 240 feet, turns them all around 360 degrees for the view, the kind of view that people just didn't really get in their normal lives back then. Not a lot of tall buildings around. Everybody's talking about it. You can probably also tell that it is a bascule bridge disguised as an amusement ride, right? He's a clever guy. He knows how to get his name and his product out there and people talking about it. One of the people who notices is O'Shaughnessy, the city engineer. They meet, they talk, and O'Shaughnessy asks his favorite question. And for once he gets an answer he can get behind, which is, yes, I can, for $17 million. Now, that's basically half of what it did cost to build a bridge. But to be fair to Strauss, it's more than a dozen years earlier. And when's the last time you heard of a big public project only doubling in price, right? And to be extra fair to Strauss, he didn't know the question was coming. So he just kind of pulls a number out of the air, loosely based on his experience. And by the way, his experience included nothing like this. He'd never built a bridge approaching this because nobody had. When this bridge was built, it wasn't the first suspension bridge by far, but it was longest. It was the longest. The distance between the two towers, it's called the main span, it's 700 feet longer than the previous record holder. So Strauss gets himself, in good stead with O'Shaughnessy. It leads to a contract for bridge building here in San Francisco. Just not this one yet. He gets to build 2 more Bascule bridges over on the other side of the city, the 3rd and 4th Street bridges. They're more than 100 years old. They still work. They go up and down every day. People use them all the time. 1919, Strauss is finally asked by O'Shaughnessy to come up with a design for the Golden Gate Strait. And to Strauss's credit, he spends 2 years doing it. His own time, his own money. This is what he comes up with. This is a rendering of his design for the Golden Gate Strait. Now, it's got sort of a nice enough suspension part in the middle, and then it's got these 2 very heavy, kind of clunky, not pretty cantilever sections coming in from each shore. This gets reproduced in all the newspapers in town, and a lot of people saw it and said, yay, we're getting a bridge. And a lot of other people said, man, that's ugly. And pretty much everybody in the engineering world said, well, that will never stand. So it doesn't go anywhere. This bridge was never built here or any place and never will. O'Shaughnessy recognizes all this right away. But he does not get rid of Strauss. Why? Because in the years that they've known each other, he's come to know Strauss as someone who is very persuasive, someone who can convince anybody of anything. And maybe Strauss's biggest contribution to the bridge was getting everybody behind the idea of building it in the first place. When this goes nowhere, Strauss himself realizes he's sort of bitten off more than he can chew, and he's not really the person with all that it takes to build and design a bridge for here. So he starts hiring people into his bridge company who can do it. The first guy he hires is a guy named Charles Ellis. He's a structural engineer and mathematician like nobody. When you hear the expression that so-and-so wrote the book on something, well, Ellis really did. He wrote a college text on engineered structures that was required reading for basically every engineering student in the country at the time. He also has this academic background as well as a working background. So quite a bit of what's in the bridge is from Ellis. And the next person hired is a guy named Leon Mosiev, a Latvian immigrant, who is the person, the big thanks we can give to him is that he insisted that the bridge be made entirely of steel. So I think everyone can picture the Brooklyn Bridge, right? Suspension bridge. It's got 2 towers made of stone. We know that this is earthquake country, and a tall pile of rocks stands no chance against a good, healthy earthquake. So Mosiev recognized no brickwork, no stonework, it's all got to be steel in order to stand up to an earthquake. So thank you. Mosiev and Ellis, they're not the only engineers, but they are the big ticket guys, and they work really well together. Mosiev comes up with a design for some part of the bridge. He sends his drawings to Ellis. Ellis goes to work on the math to prove or disprove if it's a good idea. Will it stand or fall? That being the bottom line, right? So what does Ellis have to work with to do all this math? His pencil. He has paper. Pardon me while I dig. It's never where I think it's going to be. He has a pencil. He has paper. He has the old kind of adding machine that where you pull down the handle. Here we go. And he has one of these. Slide rule. Right? That's the end of the list. This is way before computers. There's no computer-aided design, no computer modeling, nothing like that. Ellis puts in 70-hour weeks doing all this work for months and months and months. It's like taking the SAT test for months and months and months, every day of your life. Every little bit of the bridge has to be proved through math, and all of these calculations have to be repeated a half dozen times to make sure there's no tiny little problem that'll show up in a big bad way. So he works really hard. So the design starts to go forward. Strauss, for his part, he recognizes that there are still a lot of people who don't think it's a good idea for a bridge to be built here, and he starts to go on a big convince people tour. He travels from San Francisco all the way up to the Oregon border, visiting all the counties, and he will talk to any place where he can fill a room full of people. The local county government, the Better Business Bureau, the Garden Club, didn't matter. Any group of people who would listen, he would talk about why the bridge is a great idea. Why did he go up there? Because he needed those people to help support the cost of building the bridge. And they had to be convinced that it was worth it for them. You know, you're a dairy farmer up in Sonoma County, and someone says, we'd like you to help us build a bridge for San Francisco. You know, what's the response going to be? Not great. So Strauss explains, this is just going to make it easier to make money. You are going to be better connected to the markets for your goods. And he's great at it. A lot of people who hear him talk come away saying, wow, he is probably the worst public speaker I have ever heard, but I believe everything he says. And, you know, sign me up, I'm ready to support the bridge. Without that, it's hard to say what would have happened. It certainly would have just taken longer. So, that's Strauss whipping up support for the bridge. The design starts to get more serious. The public sentiment is behind the bridge, and that makes the people who really did not want the bridge to be built to start stepping forward. In 1923, an official governing body for the bridge is formed. It's a multi-county thing. It's not the whole state, but it's more than just San Francisco County. And it's called the Golden Gate Bridge and Highway District, and their job is to make sure the bridge gets, you know, designed, built, maintained, operated. That was their job, and it's still their job. It's still the same folks who run the bridge. When it gets organized, there's a little fine print that says, if there is any legal challenge to its existence and formation, it cannot operate. So the people who weren't happy about a bridge start to step forward and file lawsuits. Who do you imagine was the most upset about having a bridge built here at the Golden Gate Strait? Who stood the most to lose?
Shipping and everything.
Okay, yes, I think everybody is answering these questions now. It's hard for me to keep up, so here we go. Yeah, the ferry companies. Now, the ferry companies, the ferry boat captains, they do not have a ton of political influence, but that doesn't matter because...
Me too?
Oh, sure.
Thank
Because the ferry companies were almost entirely owned by the Southern Pacific Railroad, a very influential group that tended to get its way. The lawsuits start happening. Even the dairy farmer in Sonoma County is not happy about it, files a lawsuit. 2,307 lawsuits get filed. It takes 6 years for them to make their way through the courts. None are successful, all are dismissed. Late 1928, the Bridge District, as it's called, gets to formally open the doors and make things happen. Now, the design has kind of quietly been going forward, but they haven't been able to make any arrangements for actually building the thing until late 1928. So, they're out from under that, they start to go forward, they hit another roadblock that stops them in their tracks again. We're going to find out what that is in just a moment. On our way to see what happened, we're going to make a stop behind the Welcome Center building here. There is a nice big sample of bridge cable over there that we get to look at up close. So here we go.
Thank you.
Or rather, get down to the road in the middle. This is what they look like. When I was a teenager, this used to be in a better spot that would have been not quite out of order for the tour, but we're going to talk about this so that when we talk about building the bridge, you can bring this back to mind. So, the cables. Golden Gate Bridge is a suspension bridge, which means that the entire roadway structure is being hung from above. There is nothing underneath it to hold it up. Even where you see the roadway pass through the two towers, there's no firm attachment down below to hold it. They're kind of located, the road structure is located so it doesn't wander around and bang around too much in the tower, but there's nothing below to hold it up. Everything is the cables from above. So, when you look at the cross section, you can see that it's made up of lots of little skinny steel wires. 27,572 to be exact. They're all a little bit skinnier than a pencil. Why build a cable this way? Well, a few good reasons. Each cable is 7,650 feet long. Each cable weighs more than 12,000 tons. So, the easiest way to build a cable like this is if, say, you had a nice 8,000 foot long workshop. You built your cable, and then good luck moving it. Much too heavy, much too big. Even if you could get it to the bridge, you'd never be able to hoist it up there in place. So the cable gets the term of art is spun. It gets put together a wire at a time until all the wires are present. Then they squeeze them into the round cross section, which is just a hair over 3 feet in diameter. There's 80,000 miles of steel wire between the two cables. So 3 1/3 times around the Earth at the equator. It's a lot of wire. Another benefit of having all of those wires, the starting point is that's how you can get the thing up there. The next is it allows them to move without breaking. There is always something that's moving the bridge. The bridge moves one way or another. I mean, not shaking back and forth or anything like that, but their movements are required. Steel is considered an elastic material, which doesn't sound right. Rubber bands are elastic, right? But elasticity is something can be distorted and returned to its original shape without any help. And within tolerances, that's what these steel wires can do. If this were solid, if you could magically get a solid cable up there, and an earthquake or a windy day or anything else might move the cable, it could go to a point where it would take a bend and then not come back if it were solid, or it could even break. So having all the wires being able to kind of pass by each other in tiny little increments makes it flexible and strong. Collectively they are as strong, or if not stronger than if the whole thing was solid. So they get them into that round shape. They wrap another wire around their circumference like a really big slinky. Paint the living daylights out of it so it doesn't rust away. Every 50 feet there is a clamp, a cast steel piece with the top and bottom held together with nuts and bolts. If you look at the bridge, you'll see that coming down from the main cables, there are a lot of little skinnier cables coming straight down. Those are called the vertical suspender ropes. They're only about not quite 3 inches in diameter, but there are many of them. So altogether, they're as strong as 2 big bridge cables. They are what's between the main cables and the road surface for holding everything up. If you look at the bridge, every place you see a little cluster of the vertical suspender ropes, you're seeing 4 strands or 2 loops right next to each other. They come up from the road, they pass over the top of the clamps where there are a pair of saddles, grooves. Again, that loop of wire is not firmly attached. It's located so it doesn't go anywhere, but it allows for movement to take place and then things to come back to where they were to start with. Very important thing for the whole bridge. All right, so that's the cables. Now we're going to go find out what happened to stop the bridge district a second time.